told the police we need help. Nobody could help us because it's a civil case. We can't do anything. They couldn't do anything. What is wrong with our system?
That was Jerry Clark, and if you could sit down and have a conversation with her, she'd tell you a story that'd absolutely break your heart. It involves the death of her daughter, Wendy, a squatting disaster, a frivolous lawsuit brought by the squatter, and a judge that made this tragic story even worse. Squatting's becoming more common, and it can be tricky to navigate, so buckle up. I'll tell you all about it, and I'll tell you what you can do if you or somebody you know is faced with a squatting situation. Let's go. Wendy Clark lived alone in Colorado Springs, and sadly, she passed away in October of 2017. This is Wendy's mom, Jerry. You met her earlier. Now, after her daughter's death, she went to her home to deal with all of Wendy's belongings, and when she arrived, she found other people living in the home. One of them was this man, Jack Cole. Well, obviously, Jerry called the cops. When the cops showed up, Jack told them that Wendy had been his wife, and he had a right to be in the home.
That's a lie.
Now, according to local newspapers, Wendy and Jack had never met, so obviously they weren't married. Anyway, the cops said that there really wasn't anything they could do. They treat these situations like landlord-tenant disputes, and they left Jerry to figure this thing out on her own. It took 3 months, but Jerry did eventually have her day in court. And Jack Cole was told by the judge that he had to get out. And he did leave the property. But before he left, he and whoever else was living there completely trashed the house. They changed the lock, stole Wendy's clothes, furniture, even her car. And of course, no one was ever arrested for that theft. Fast forward, Jack has a lot of time on his hands, and he uses that time to study law, apparently, because among other frivolous lawsuits filed by Jack, he filed a lawsuit against Wendy Clark's family. He claimed that he'd been traumatized by the eviction and specifically cited injured feelings. And he was looking for about $400,000 in damages. Let's all share a moment of silence for Jack Cole's injured feelings. Okay, this judge, the so-called honorable, but possibly incompetent G. David Miller, sided with Jack Cole, and he issued a $400,000 judgment against the Clark family. Think about that for a minute. This family had lost their daughter, they dealt with this squatter, and instead of being able just to grieve their loss, they're dealing with all this drama, and on top of it, they get a $400,000 judgment levied against them because Jack Cole was sad.
For, quote, injuring his feelings, mental anguish, and loss of his social standing, as a convicted felon, I guess, among other gibberish.
This man had lived rent-free in a dead woman's home. He fought the family when they asked him to leave, trashed the house, took her belongings, and he walked away without any consequences. And then he gets a $400,000 judgment against the family. And I don't think the Clarks could have gotten a $400,000 judgment against him. Isn't that messed up? So how does this happen?
To be honest, we don't know. We've been unable to speak directly or communicate via email with Judge Miller. The Clark family now demanding answers and accountability.
Anyway, the reason the judge sided with Jack Cole instead of Jerry Clark is because Jack Cole had lied. Shocking, right? When you sue somebody, you have to serve that person. And the documentation that proves that that person was served is called an affidavit of service. It has to be notarized. You can have the sheriff's department do it, or you can have somebody else do it, but they have to be served. And he submitted a document that said Jerry had been served when she hadn't. Who was it that had supposedly served Jerry Clark?
Cole allegedly had a man named Travis Rickard serve the papers on October 16th, 2019. But he's no process server. He's a hustler, according to his Facebook page. And Travis Rickard is really Roger Travis Rickard, and he's also a convicted felon serving time in prison.
But Travis Rickard never served any paperwork. And we know this because Travis was in jail the day that the documents were supposedly served to the Clark family. Anyway, they lied, and no one in the courts apparently read the documents because there were some pretty serious red flags in terms of addresses and dates that really should have set off some warnings for these people. But the courts pushed it through and the judge rubber stamped it. And now the Clarks owe Jack Cole $400,000. Poor Jerry's just going about her life doing things that normal people do, like working and paying bills and not squatting. And she gets a letter in the mail that says that she owes this deadbeat $400,000 and she's got to sort it all out.
Someone at the courthouse dropped the ball, didn't catch this. He's destroying our lives.
Eventually, Jerry got to the courts. They got to the bottom of it, realized that this had all been fabricated. The judge set aside that judgment of $400,000. And now Jack Cole has to ask the court for permission to sue people because it sounds like he's done this multiple times. This is Eric Ross. He's the reporter who covered the story. And I'm grateful for him. He did some awesome investigative work for this family and really helped them out in this situation. But most squatting stories never make the news. It doesn't take the death of a family member for a normal, law-abiding citizen to find themselves becoming the victim of a squatter. It can happen when you go on vacation. It can happen if you own an Airbnb. Maybe you have a family member you've asked to move out and they won't. Or possibly you have an unwanted house guest, maybe somebody you let stay for a little while who is now refusing to leave. Sometimes it can happen with just as little as having mail delivered to your house in the name of another person. And as a real estate agent in Colorado, I like to follow news stories that pertain to real estate. Squatters have been all over the news recently, and maybe you saw that story about the landlord who chased the squatters out of her house in New York. And when the cops were called, they arrested the homeowner, not the squatter. Again, these stories aren't rare. Here's a really wild one. This man is Jaskaran Singh. He lives in Washington State, and he unknowingly rented his house to Sang Kim, a man who is refusing to pay rent to this landlord. Sang Kim has been labeled a serial squatter in the press because he's repeatedly taken advantage of a system that is stacked in the favor of the offender and punishes the homeowner.
Yeah, this really goes back, as Josh Caron was saying, this backed up eviction caseload in the King County court system. It's completely broken.
In most states, as crazy as it sounds, you can't count on the courts to protect your rights as a homeowner. And if you call the cops, you are more likely to be arrested than the person who is living rent-free in your home. By some accounts, Sang Kim hasn't paid rent in over 2 years and owes his landlord over $80,000. And he recently got the courts to delay eviction proceedings again, while also getting them to grant him a restraining order against the homeowner who showed up just trying to collect his rent. And the state of Washington doesn't care about landlords and homeowners. How about Colorado? Well, the reason I chose this story is because Eric Ross, the investigative journalist that helped the Clark family navigate this whole mess, he went on to partner with some state legislatures, and in 2018, a bill was passed that expedited the access to the courts for people who are dealing with squatters. If you find yourself dealing with a squatter, the first thing you're going to want to do is read this bill. It's Senate Bill 18-015. You can Google that and find it pretty easily. I'll put a link to it down in the description. Keep in mind, squatters usually do a lot of damage once they're in the home, and they do it very quickly, so time is of the essence. The next thing you'll want to do after reading that bill is to call an attorney. If it's been a very short time and you act quickly enough, you might be able to call the police and have them help you get the squatter out of the house. But the more time goes by, the more likely it is you'll need to have the courts involved in the whole process. And in Colorado, you can evict somebody yourself. It's not particularly tricky. That said, most likely you're going to want to call an attorney and ask them what they charge to evict a squatter. Because if you do file the paperwork yourself and you do anything incorrectly, it could delay the eviction. And while the clerks clearly missed Jack Cole's problems in his paperwork, they'll probably catch yours. And just know that since the squatters do a lot of damage very quickly, by letting them stay long enough for you to do the paperwork yourself, you might actually be costing yourself more money than hiring an attorney to handle the eviction. Thankfully, Colorado expedites the eviction process when there's a squatter involved. But when you get to states like California and New York, and even Washington, it could take 2 years to get rid of a squatter. That's 2 years of attorney fees, 2 years of missed rent, 2 years of mental anguish knowing that there's somebody stealing from you every single day and there's nothing you can do about it, because if you do something about it, they're going to lock you up. And when that person is evicted, they hardly ever face any consequences for what they've done. In some places, there's a developing market for people who help you get rid of squatters. Flash Shelton calls himself the squatter hunter. He lives in California and he charges upwards of $5,000 to get rid of squatters, and he's pretty good at it too. He has a YouTube channel and he gives tips on how to deal with these heathens. And it's a fun watch. Check it out if you're interested in learning more about squatting and how to deal with it. He does caution you to make sure you know the laws where you live, because if you get yourself in a place where the tenant can start a civil action against you, it does reinforce their rights to stay in the home and it makes it harder to get rid of them. When I talk about squatting, I'm talking about somebody living in the home and you'd like them to leave. I'm not talking about somebody taking over the home and becoming the new owner. That is called adverse possession, and it's a whole other story. While a person may be able to claim squatters' rights in a short amount of time, claiming ownership in Colorado takes 18 years of obvious open use in order for you to claim a property as your own. Now, if you have some form of ownership documentation, maybe there's a defect in it, but you've been paying taxes on the property, you can claim ownership rights in as little as 7 years. And in that situation, it would be called color of title. When it comes to adverse possession, every state's different. And in places like California and Montana, you might be able to claim ownership rights in as little as 5 years. And in a state like New Jersey, it might take as long as 30 years. And I'm just a real estate agent with a YouTube channel. So if you find yourself in one of these situations, it can be really tricky to navigate, and you probably need to employ an expert. Again, call an attorney, preferably a real estate attorney, and find out what your options are. Squatting is just another example added to the long list of examples where normal people are playing by the rules and they're victimized by people who never play by the rules. Then the rule followers turn to the system for answers, and they often find themselves victimized yet again. And with an increase in drug use and homelessness, we've been promised more squatters. Do you have any good squatting stories? If so, drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to talk real estate, my contact information is in the description below. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it so much, and I'll catch you in the next video.